If you've ever thought your job was tough, wait till you hear about a childhood where your bedtime lullaby was the sound of sizzling skin. Ever held a hammer before breakfast? No? Then you haven't lived in Thorn's Forge, where dreams are made of sweat, soot, and shattered kneecaps. Tonight, we're diving into the iron-pounding, eyebrow-scorching life of a medieval blacksmith. And trust me, this ain't your fantasy novel montage. We've all seen them in movies, slow-motion hammer swings, sparks flying like it's the 4th of July. But real medieval blacksmithing? That was just pain in 120 Fahrenheit, seasoned with calluses. It wasn't majestic, it was miserable. So before you get too comfy, hit that subscribe button if you're into wild historical reality checks, and drop a comment below with your time zone and location. It's always crazy to see where you legends are watching from. Now dim the lights, maybe start up a fan for dramatic background hums, and prepare yourself because you're about to live a day in the boots of young Cedric Ironhand. No titles, no lands, no nobles bowing at your feet, just anvil-shaped bruises, an inherited forge, and a baby blanket that probably smelled like burning leather. Cedric's first steps weren't toward a toy chest, they were toward a coal pit. By age 6, he wasn't a child, he was a pint-sized apprentice, which is olden day speak for sweaty errand goblin with no wage and 24/7 soot makeup. His toys? Rusty pliers. His playground? The soot-caked floor next to a furnace that could cook your soul. Other kids played tag. Cedric played guess if this is hot enough to melt bone. His father, Brom the Smith, was built like a brick chimney and spoke entirely in smoke grunts, and the phrase, again, harder. Brom's idea of bonding? Letting Cedric hold the hammer for more than 4 seconds before yelling at him for holding it wrong. Brom had hands like burnt tree stumps and a face carved by decades of fire, fury, and overdue taxes. Cedric learned everything by watching, surviving, and not asking dumb questions. Because in Brom's forge, curiosity earned you a flying horseshoe and 3 days of silent treatment. Birthdays? Ha! Days off? Try again. If the forge was awake, so were you. The forge didn't take breaks, so neither did Cedric. Time off meant sweeping ash instead of lifting iron. Rest meant dodging hot tongs instead of boiling water. This wasn't education. It was trial by fire, literally. Cedric was becoming a master of pain management, fire logic, and how to nap without collapsing into a molten disaster. By 10, he smelled like molten regret, swore like a dockhand, and could carry water barrels heavier than his dog, assuming the dog hadn't already escaped. The constant ringing and cussing. This wasn't just a job. It was a transformation. Childhood was a rumor. The forge was his reality now. While other kids were skipping rocks, Cedric was learning how to not lose a finger to a blade he was sharpening. His jungle gym was a rack of glowing tongs next to a lava pit. Every step was a gamble. Every mistake, a branding opportunity. Apprentice was just a fancy word for do everything and still get yelled at. He pumped the bellows, restacked the coal, polished tools, swept cinders, and dodged falling metal all before breakfast. Compensation? A cold hunk of bread and maybe a not bad grunt if he was lucky. Other village kids smelled like sheep and goat milk. Cedric smelled like stress and fear. They'd grow up to milk cows. Cedric would grow up to hammer nails by the thousands, each one reheated, reshaped, rehammered, to meet some baron's chicken coop standards. When Brom finally let him use a hammer on his own, it came with a 10-minute critique and a soul-crushing stare. Saying, "I'm tired," was forbidden. Fatigue was for candles, not blacksmiths. So he kept going, kept swinging, kept from crying in front of Brom, because once you cried in the forge, you cried forever. And in Brom's eyes, Cedric wasn't a boy anymore, he was steel in the making. The forge became more than a workplace. It was a creature, a loud, moody, fire-belching beast that needed constant feeding, respect, and sometimes an apology. By his teens, Cedric knew every hiss, every wheeze of the bellows, every scream of red-hot iron meeting cold water. It was like a violent lullaby. He moved with its rhythm, not out of joy, but survival. The heat didn't feel hot anymore. It just was, like air, like death. He knew which stones tried to eat your feet, which coals betrayed you, which tools were liars. His skin darkened from soot, not sun. His apron smelled like it had trauma. Legally, the forge belonged to Brom. Spiritually, it owned Cedric. Silence unnerved him. The moment the forge went quiet, he felt like something was broken in the world. Cedric had no friends left, just people who asked, "Is he still alive?" The answer was yes, barely. He was the forge now. 2 legs, 1 hammer, and 1,000 burns. And against all logic, a part of him loved it. Not the blisters, not the pain, but that moment when the metal listened, when it bent, when it gleamed, when his work clicked and the world felt right. For a heartbeat, he wasn't just a sweating gremlin in a smoke box, he was a creator. Then a customer screamed, the fire howled, and the forge demanded more. And so he lifted the hammer again. While others were just hitting puberty, Cedric's bones felt like they'd aged 80 years. His arms weren't heroic, they were survived 100 anvils arms. His back? Curved from years of leaning over hot anvils. His knees sounded like tortured mice every time he crouched. His shoulders clicked like a bad lock. And his hands? Forget fingers. He had soot-stained claws. Nails? Half gone. Skin? Burned. Blistered. Scarred. Offering him a loaf of bread felt like asking a cactus to play piano. Rest days? What are those? Pulled a muscle? Use the other one. Twisted your wrist? Wrap it in a rag and keep hammering. Iron waits for no man. Sleep was a myth. His muscles screamed. His ears rang. His arms twitched mid-dream. He smelled like regret with a dash of agony. And what did Brom say? Good. You're learning. And weirdly, he was. Not in spite of the pain, but because of it. He was being shaped, hardened, tempered by heat, pressure, repetition. By the time most boys hit manhood, Cedric had lived 2 lifetimes and been crushed by both. And the wild part? This was just the beginning. In most jobs, smoke is a nuisance. In Cedric's, it was a coworker, a rude, clingy one. The air was a smoky stew of ash, regret, and toxic metals. Chimneys? Nah. There was a hole in the ceiling and a prayer. Sometimes, opening a door just meant inviting all the soot into your eyes. Breathing hurt. First it stung, then it coughed, then it just became background noise. Black mucus? Normal. Voice cracking like broken pottery? Standard. Cedric's throat constantly felt like it had hosted a bonfire the night before. And it wasn't just the forge's fire. Grinding dust, oil smoke, charred leather. If it burned, he'd inhaled it. Protective gear? A crusty rag tied around his face that somehow made him gag more than the smoke. Take it off and you choked on fire. Keep it on and you marinated in sweat. Either way, your lungs were doomed. Long-term health? Black lung. Early death. Career perks. But Cedric wasn't thinking years ahead. He was thinking, finish this gate hinge before Brom notices the wobble. The forge air didn't keep you alive, it kept you hammering. By now, Cedric had a toxic friendship with his tools. His hammer, he named it. Swore at it. Loved it. It was part of him. His shoulder now popped every time he lifted it like a haunted castanet. Without the hammer, he was just a filthy teenager in a smokehouse. With it, he was a blacksmith. A blistered, cursing, smoking blacksmith. His tongs? Betrayal in metal form. They dropped iron, burned fingers, pinched skin. His dad yelled, "Grip it like a man." Cedric wanted to toss them into the furnace out of spite. The chisel? Once sharp. Now it was basically a suggestion. But it had pried, scraped, split, even opened jammed doors when neighbors came crying for help. His tool bench looked like a medieval horror show, and honestly, it was. Every tool had stabbed, burned, or scarred him. His hands flinched instinctively at new additions. His apron? Meant to protect. In reality, it caught fire debris and snuggled it lovingly against his ribs. Yet he cared for them all. He oiled, sharpened, and lined them up every night, because if one failed, he failed. No tools, no work. No work, no food. Tools weren't just tools. They were survival. And also, daily torment. Each whispered, "We keep you alive, but we will break you." And Cedric just nodded and said, "Fine. Now, pass the hammer." He didn't rule a kingdom. He didn't wear shining armor. But if Cedric disappeared for 48 hours, the entire village would fall apart. The knights, the farmers, the monks, the bakers, they all needed something. Always. Constantly. He was the medieval version of customer support, emergency services, and mechanical maintenance wrapped in soot and sarcasm. And the best part? Oh, we haven't even gotten there yet. No one ever thanks you. Not once. They act like you were born with iron dust in your lungs and a lifelong obligation to fix their crooked gates and squeaky hinges. When their rake works, their oven door shuts, or their shield holds together during a bar brawl. They give you a nod not of appreciation, but of expectation. Like it's your sacred honor to patch their leaky barrel for a slice of dry rye bread and a shrug. Payment? That's a dice roll. One day you're paid in copper coins, the next in wilted radishes, and sometimes in, "I'll get you back next full moon." They forget. They always do. Like that one man who gave you a cold chicken carcass as payment. Spoiler, it wasn't even soup-worthy. Need something fixed? You're the village fixer of everything, whether it's yours or not. Someone bent a gate by sitting on it like a sack of grain? You're on it. Sword snapped during a drunken duel? Still you. Unidentifiable, weird piece of metal that may or may not be a cursed spoon? Yep, guess who's gotta make it work again? But when songs are sung and praises are thrown like confetti, it's never for you. The glory goes to Sir Elric the Knight, Father Dern the Preacher, or Myrna the Goat Lady who won fattest livestock at the harvest fair. You're just that smith fella, a background character, a dependable tool, not a person. But you know something they don't. You know the truth. Without you, their world collapses in a week. Their tools would rust, carts fall apart, horses limp, and gates hang half dead on broken hinges. They may not chant your name, but their lives are built on the backbone of your work. You don't need applause. You already run the whole damn show quietly, with a hammer. And when peace rolls in, that should be good news, right? No raiders, no lords demanding emergency axe repairs, no last-minute sword sharpening for war. But for you, peace means poverty. Because blacksmiths, contrary to village gossip, don't live off spoons and shoe nails. It's war that fills your pouch. During conflict, you're swamped. Orders flood in swords, armor, arrows by the barrel. Even horseshoes wear down faster under charging hooves. The forge blazes, coin jingles, and for once you sleep with a full stomach and a temporary memory wipe on your ale tab. Then, like the swing of a scythe, it ends. The war, the contracts, the purpose. A noble calls for peace, and suddenly no one's knocking. No swords, no helmets, just an old man who wants you to fix his hoe and can offer 3 slightly suspicious onions. Sure, you can still make things. Cauldrons, latches, pokers, the everyday bits, but the money's in mayhem. And even when you give them your best, they treat you like you're asking too much. Raise your prices by a single coin, and it's as if you insulted their cow's honor. You're just bending metal, they say, as if molten steel sings itself into shape while angels do interpretive dance. You find yourself missing the chaos, not the screams or scorched villages, just the momentum, the steady hum of purpose, the lineup of soldiers with dented shields and jingly coin bags. That mattered. That felt real. Now, you're making hinges for cellars no one locks, straightening rakes that should have retired a decade ago, patching cookware for people who think rust adds flavor. Peace may mean calm for the world, but for you, it means empty pockets and gnawing hunger. And you'd never say it aloud, not where the priest might hear, but a tiny voice in the back of your mind whispers, maybe just a little battle? A brief skirmish? A border spat? Because broken swords buy bread. Other jobs end. They have deadlines, rewards, and sometimes a thank you feast. Blacksmithing doesn't end. It loops. Patch one gate, and a wagon wheel shatters. Forge 10 nails, and a man shows up demanding 15 but thicker, and I'll pay after harvest. You wake before dawn, work through dusk, and even then your mind keeps swinging hammers. In your sleep, you're counting rivets and remembering you still haven't been paid for that cartwheel you fixed a month ago. Even the quick jobs are lies. A villager strolls in, holding a rake that looks like it was mangled in battle. Just a quick fix, they say. You nod, already tasting the 2-hour slog of reshaping, reheating, hammering, all while they hover, asking every 5 minutes, is it done yet? You think maybe you can rest, finally eat something that isn't dusty stew. But no, your apprentice, little Eli, always out of breath, bursts in. Sir, the friar's horse is limping again. And of course it is, because around here, blacksmith is just a polite term for town's emergency catch-all. The forge is a needy beast. It won't feed itself. The tools rust if ignored. The anvil shifts when it's too hot. Bellows crack when it's cold. Something's always breaking, or about to. Holidays? Those are for priests and people who don't own anvils. Technically, Sunday is a day of rest unless someone's cart loses a wheel on the way to the market. Then you're half-dressed, eyes squinting in the morning smoke, hammering and praying the vicar doesn't walk by. To-do lists, useless. There's no done, just not yet broken. This isn't a job. It's a cycle. Work, fix, repeat, until your hammer breaks, or your back does. And here's the part no one wants to hear. You kind of love it. You'd think shaping fire-breathing metal all day would at least earn you a proper meal and a decent night's sleep. Nope. In blacksmith life, both are mythical luxuries like unicorns or tax refunds. Let's talk food. You burn through more calories than a runaway mule. And what do you get? Dry crust, cold pottage with mystery roots, and maybe a bite of dried pork if it's someone's wedding day. You eat on your feet, one hand still gripping tongs, the other trying to shield your soup from floating ash. You eat like a fugitive. Meals are speedruns, conversations are mumbles, and if someone knocks mid-bite because their barn door squeaks, congrats, your stew's now a smoky broth. Food isn't joy, it's fuel. Fast in, hammer out. Then there's sleep, or the cruel excuse for it. When you finally collapse into bed, your hands are pulsing, your back is locked like a castle gate, and your ears are still ringing like a cathedral bell. Your bed is a lumpy sack of straw that may or may not contain something with legs. Your blanket smells like smoke, old beer, and poor life choices. And just as your eyes close, your brain kicks in. You forgot that latch, it says. That customer still owes you 6 eggs, it adds. Sleep becomes a battle. You toss, turn, whisper negotiations to your ceiling beams, trying to figure out if 5 hours is enough to avoid being murdered by the friar's nephew for a delayed repair. Night surprises are the worst. A horse throws a shoe. A storm destroys a roof. A noble wakes up craving a hunt and suddenly needs his sword sharpened now, because clearly you don't need rest. You survive on scraps of food and smuggled naps. Your day doesn't pause. It intermits, just enough to eat or blink before the forge yells again. Food and rest aren't breaks. They're obstacles between hammer swings. There was a time when your hands were soft. Long ago, you think, maybe. Now they're battered relics cracked, knotted, stiff as dried bark. You've crushed walnuts bare-handed, but you fumble with your bootlaces. A quill? Forget it. But red-hot metal? That you can handle. Every joint clicks. Knuckles look like they lost a tavern fight. Blisters layer like tree rings. 5 or more? Must be summer. You've lost nails more times than you can count. Some fell off quietly. Others, not so much. Once, you crushed your thumb so bad it turned purple-black and throbbed for a fortnight. You didn't stop working. You just switched hands and cursed louder. Cuts are background noise. Files slice. Iron snaps. You leak blood weekly. You just wipe it and carry on. But burns are their own kind of monster. Some barely sting, others bubble, scar, and hiss like betrayed serpents. You've branded yourself more than the cattle in the next field. At this point, you barely notice unless it bubbles. But if one thing has grown, it's your grip strength. You could strangle a bear, but fine motor skills? Gone. You drop tools. Your hands shake in the cold. You're 30, but your hands scream, retired knight-turned dice hustler. Still, they keep you alive. These scarred tools of flesh, they mold swords, fix plows, and lift the hammer that holds your worth. They hurt every second, but they work. And in this world, that's what counts. As for your scent, well, you haven't smelled clean since you were 5. The day your father pressed a hammer into your palm, your personal fragrance became a permanent blend of burnt bacon, wet ash, and don't sit next to him. You could bathe in theory, but water's cold, and you're up before the birds. By the time you'd scrub clean, you'd be filthy again. So why bother? Your tunic and apron singed, stained, stiff with history, haven't known soap since last year's solstice festival. Even then, someone dumped ale on them by noon. Perfume? It lasts 3 minutes before the forge eats it. Flowers wilt when you pass. Bread goes stale faster. Cats avoid you. And people notice. You walk into the tavern, and folks part like you're carrying plague. The innkeeper seats you near a window, not for the view, but ventilation. And still, you accept it. You wear the smell like armor. People know you. They respect you, reluctantly, through gritted teeth and pinched noses, because even if you don't win hearts, you've forged the town's spine. And now, it's your son's turn. He's 7, no wooden swords, no chasing chickens. He hauls coal, pumps, bellows, steadies the iron while sparks fly. He flinches. You say, "Don't flinch." His clothes smell like wet burlap and molten shame. You feel guilty a little, but not enough to stop. You're not punishing him. You're preparing him, because this life doesn't wait. It shapes you early, like iron. He watches you swing the hammer wide-eyed, half in awe, half terrified, and you recognize that stare. It's the same one you gave your father, back when he looked like a giant mountain of smoke and noise. Now, you understand, he wasn't carved from stone, just exhaustion and duty. Not like that, grip it firm. That's too cold, boy. And no tears, it's just a little burn. And what do you get? Dry crust, cold pottage with mystery roots, and maybe a bite of dried pork if it's someone's wedding day. You eat on your feet, one hand still gripping tongs, the other trying to shield your soup from floating ash. You eat like a fugitive. Meals are speed runs, conversations are mumbles. And if someone knocks mid-bite because their barn door squeaks, congrats, your stew's now a smoky broth. Food isn't joy, it's fuel. Fast in, hammer out. Then there's sleep, or the cruel excuse for it. When you finally collapse into bed, your hands are pulsing. Your back is locked like a castle gate, and your ears are still ringing like a cathedral bell. Your bed is a lumpy sack of straw that may or may not contain something with legs. Your blanket smells like smoke, old beer, and poor life choices. And just as your eyes close, your brain kicks in. You forgot that latch, it says. That customer still owes you 6 eggs, it adds. Sleep becomes a battle. You toss, turn, whisper negotiations to your ceiling beams, trying to figure out if 5 hours is enough to avoid being murdered by the friar's nephew for a delayed repair. Night surprises are the worst. A horse throws a shoe. A storm destroys a roof. A noble wakes up craving a hunt and suddenly needs his sword sharpened now, because clearly you don't need rest. You survive on scraps of food and smuggled naps. Your day doesn't pause. It intermits, just enough to eat or blink before the forge yells again. Food and rest aren't breaks. They're obstacles between hammer swings. There was a time when your hands were soft. Long ago, you think, maybe. Now they're battered relics cracked, knotted, stiff as dried bark. You've crushed walnuts barehanded, but you fumble with your bootlaces. A quill? Forget it. But red-hot metal? That you can handle. Every joint clicks. Knuckles look like they lost a tavern fight. Blisters layer like tree rings. 5 or more? Must be summer. You've lost nails more times than you can count. Some fell off quietly. Others, not so much. Once, You crushed your thumb so bad it turned purple-black and throbbed for a fortnight. You didn't stop working. You just switched hands and cursed louder. Cuts are background noise. Files slice. Iron snaps. You leak blood weekly. You just wipe it and carry on. But burns are their own kind of monster. Some barely sting, others bubble, scar, and hiss like betrayed serpents. You've branded yourself more than the cattle in the next field. At this point, you barely notice unless it bubbles. But if one thing has grown, it's your grip strength. You could strangle a bear, but fine motor skills? Gone. You drop tools. Your hands shake in the cold. You're 30, but your hands scream, retired knight-turned-dice hustler. Still, they keep you alive. These scarred tools of flesh, they mold swords, fix plows, and lift the hammer that holds your worth. They hurt every second, but they work. And in this world, that's what counts. As for your scent, well, you haven't smelled clean since you were 5. The day your father pressed a hammer into your palm, your personal fragrance became a permanent blend of burnt bacon, wet ash, and don't sit next to him. You could bathe in theory, but water's cold, and you're up before the birds. By the time you'd scrub clean, you'd be filthy again. So why bother? Your tunic and apron singed, stained, stiff with history, haven't known soap since last year's solstice festival. Even then, someone dumped ale on them by noon. Perfume? It lasts 3 minutes before the forge eats it. Flowers wilt when you pass. Bread goes stale faster. Cats avoid you. And people notice. You walk into the tavern, and folks part like you're carrying plague. The innkeeper seats you near a window, not for the view, but ventilation. And still, you accept it. You wear the smell like armor. People know you. They respect you, reluctantly, through gritted teeth and pinched noses, because even if you don't win hearts, you've forged the town's spine. And now, it's your son's turn. He's 7, no wooden swords, no chasing chickens. He hauls coal, pumps, bellows, steadies the iron while sparks fly. He flinches. You say, "Don't flinch." His clothes smell like wet burlap and molten shame. You feel guilty a little, but not enough to stop. You're not punishing him. You're preparing him, because this life doesn't wait. It shapes you early, like iron. He watches you swing the hammer wide-eyed, half in awe, half terrified, and you recognize that stare. It's the same one you gave your father, back when he looked like a giant mountain of smoke and noise. Now, you understand, he wasn't carved from stone, just exhaustion and duty. Not like that, grip it firm. That's too cold, boy. And no tears, it's just a little burn. You try to be gentler when you can. A story told by the forge light. A scrap of dried apple if there's any to spare. But tenderness doesn't last long in this place. There's iron to shape, fire to feed, and no space for soft hands. His palms will soon mirror yours. His spine will start to ache before he even grows facial hair. He'll sleep through the ringing and wake up before dawn without needing to be told. He'll outgrow his tunic, but the scorch marks will stay. And one day, when your knees won't hold, your shoulder locks, and your lungs betray you, he'll pick up the hammer you can't lift anymore. People might say it's unjust, that this cycle should have broken. But this isn't injustice. This is inheritance, a bloodline of burn marks and iron dust. You're not just teaching him a trade, you're passing him the fire itself. So yes, you're raising him to do it all again. Not out of cruelty, but because someone has to keep the forge lit. You've spent your life pressed too close to flame, hauling iron and breathing smoke. It was never about if your body would give up. It was always when. And now, the when has arrived. Your knees groan like old doors in a storm. Your back no longer straightens, not even with effort. Fingers once strong enough to twist, steel now tremble just holding a mug. The fire still crackles. But your body no longer answers the call. You don't go out with fireworks or fame, no last stand, no epic tale sung in halls. You just slow down. You pass the tongs, the hammer, then the orders. You start sitting more, watching. He begins asking the questions, and sometimes you can't remember the answers. The villagers stop coming to you first. They still nod as they walk past with that same tired respect, but they speak to him now. It's his hands that are tough, his arms that ache. The burden has shifted to a new back, and somehow, beneath the exhaustion, you're proud. You were never rich, never owned books or lands or silks, but you mattered. You kept the sword sharp, the hinges swinging, the wagons rolling. You were the cog that made the wheel turn, even if no one ever thanked you. You won't live long. Most smiths don't. Not because of fate, but because the job takes more than it gives. Smoke-laced lungs, joints that crunch like gravel, a heart worn down by heat and duty. But when you're gone, your work will stay, in the nails that hold up the chapel, in the blade carried by the Lord, in the horseshoe that lets a traveler ride home. You'll leave no monuments, no golden crest, just tools, scars, and a son who still swings the hammer. And in this world, that's enough. They'll bury you in simple dirt, under a wooden marker carved with your name. But when the hammer strikes metal days later, that echo in the village air, that's still you, in spirit, keeping time with every ring. You were never the one leading soldiers to glory, banners high. You didn't wear polished armor. You forged it. You didn't till the land, but you made the plow that did. You didn't bake bread, but you built the oven doors that made it possible. You didn't design castles, but every hinge, every nail in those stone walls, your fire touched them all. You were the blacksmith, and that meant everything. While rulers swapped crowns and scrolls, rewrote borders, you stood where the heat lived, forging, bending, breathing life into steel. 1,000 nameless pieces, hooks, hinges, clasps, blades. Not one worthy of song, yet all of them necessary. Your life was loud, clang after clang, hammering time forward. But your legacy? Quiet, enduring. It doesn't shout, it supports. No bard ever sang of your hammer strokes. No poem named your tongs. But every creak of a working wheel, every door that shuts with ease, every soldier's blade that doesn't snap, that was your music. They saw smoke rise from your forge and thought it was just fire. But inside, it was creation, a dance of endurance and discipline. You didn't just mold metal, you shaped society, one rivet at a time. And long after your hands fall still, the forge still breathes. Your son picks up where you left off. One day, your grandson will do the same. Your name might fade, lost to time and dust, but your work will survive, passed hand to hand, each grip a silent thanks. You were never crowned, but without you, nothing moved. No wagons rolled, no homes stood, no warriors rode to battle. You were the root beneath the kingdom's tree, the ember under every tale of conquest and peace. Because in a world built of stone, wood, and willpower, you were the fire, the quiet spark that turned raw ore into civilization. Long before modern chemistry wore lab coats or perched over Bunsen burners, the secrets of transformation were considered sacred. Alchemy didn't begin in shadowy European chambers with flasks and bubbling mixtures. Its first true breath came in the blazing sun of ancient Egypt, a world where change was divine, not scientific. The Egyptians had a word, chemia, born from Chem, the black land. It described the rich, dark soil gifted by the Nile's floods. But this wasn't just about dirt, it was about potential. Black, to the Egyptians, meant life unshaped, raw, possibility, earth ready to become something more. So their land itself became metaphor, not just a place, a symbol of transformation. From chemia came alchemy. But in Egypt, it wasn't about gold. Not yet. Alchemy, in its true ancient form, was everywhere. It was how the dead were preserved, not buried, but transformed for eternity. It was how priests made sacred elixirs from oils and minerals. It was how dough became bread and grain fermented into beer. Every small miracle, every act of turning one thing into another, that was alchemy. More than physical, it was spiritual. The Egyptians believed that to change something on the outside, you had to understand it inside first. That idea, transformation from within, would echo across continents and centuries in nearly every mystical alchemical text ever written. Some say the gods themselves guided this knowledge. Chief among them, the ibis-headed deity of wisdom and magic, Thoth. Thoth wasn't just a scribe of the heavens. He was the keeper of knowledge, the guardian of sacred balance. With a crescent moon upon his head, he represented order in a world of chaos. The Egyptians believed he wrote thousands of scrolls containing the laws of life, death, and beyond, most lost, forbidden, or unreadable by mortal minds. But one fragment survived the fire of time. The Emerald Tablet, a glimmering legend passed from mystic to philosopher, alchemist to dreamer. It was said to be etched on a glowing green stone, short maybe a dozen lines, but each one packed with cosmic weight. Its first line became scripture for seekers. That which is above is like that which is below, and that which is below is like that which is above. This principle of correspondence claimed the stars mirrored the soul, that the universe was not separate from you, it was you. Change the world inside, and the world outside followed. The tablet didn't offer a step-by-step guide to making gold. It offered a philosophy, a worldview, a cosmic challenge. Nothing is fixed. Everything can change. Lead into gold. Ignorance into wisdom. Man into God. It spoke of the one thing, the mysterious source of all existence, rising from earth, falling from the sky, carrying the power of creation itself. Some called it the philosopher's stone. Others, the soul, the ether, consciousness. Whatever it was, it could transform anything. But here's the twist. The tablet didn't reveal how. Only the worthy would see. You had to be more than a reader. You had to be a seeker, one ready to suffer, to question, to change. This riddle, this fragment of fire passed on from Egypt, flowed across lands and languages into Persia, where the next great chapter would be written. Even as Egypt's golden age dimmed, alchemy didn't disappear. It migrated, carried by caravans, mystics, and scribes. It reached Persia, where it found new form. Here, it wasn't just knowledge passed on, it was knowledge reborn. Influenced by Zoroastrianism, one of the world's oldest monotheistic religions, Persian alchemy embraced duality, a world of light and dark, purity and decay. Fire, sacred to Zoroastrians, wasn't just heat. It was divine truth, the eternal flame that purified the world. Yet, even among these flames, it was a mystic from Roman Egypt who gave alchemy its true philosophical soul, Zosimos of Panopolis. Living in the 3rd or 4th century CE, Zosimos didn't just write about furnaces or distillation, he wrote about visions. In his dreams, he saw himself burned, dismembered, transmuted not as horror, but rebirth. To him, the alchemist had to suffer like the metal, be broken down to become new. He gave alchemy its most powerful idea, spiritual transformation, that before you could make gold, you had to become gold. Zosimos filled his writings with symbols: lions devouring snakes, men dissolving into colored smoke, gods rising from flames. It was more than science. It was myth, ritual, revelation. True knowledge, he believed, couldn't be memorized. It had to be earned through work, pain, and awakening. His legacy stretched far beyond his time. Alchemy wasn't just early science now. It had become sacred philosophy. And just as Zosimos' words faded into the margins of forgotten scrolls, another torch was lit not in Europe, but in the rising heart of Islamic civilization. Jabir ibn Hayyan didn't just dabble in fire and flasks, he rewired how transformation itself was understood. While he championed rigorous experimentation, he never strayed from the sacred spark at alchemy's core. To Jabir, the universe was a living, breathing balance of 4 elemental forces: earth, air, fire, and water, all infused with unseen energies and spiritual intent. His view was as much cosmic poetry as it was formula. Every act of transformation, melting, distilling, binding, echoed a shift within the soul. Jabir believed that to change the world outside, you had to restore harmony within. He called it mise-en balance. As the body needs balance to stay healthy, metals too had to find equilibrium to achieve perfection. Gold wasn't just a shiny prize, it was the material ideal, the mirror of harmony. And if even the dullest lead could be brought into balance, then so could anything or anyone. Jabir's influence didn't stay penned behind the golden arches of Islamic civilization. His writings traveled quietly at first in the form of Arabic texts. Later, they crossed into Europe through Latin translations, carried by scribes who barely grasped the brilliance they were handling. Unknowingly, Western scholars were climbing a ladder Jabir had built centuries earlier. Thanks to Jabir ibn Hayyan, alchemy took a massive leap. It was no longer just sacred metaphor, it became a method, a system, a structured science. And yet it retained its ancient soul, transformation not just of matter, but of the self. While the Islamic world preserved, refined, and expanded the treasures of ancient knowledge, Europe floundered in dogma and darkness. But wisdom has a habit of slipping through cracks. And eventually, it crossed the cultural divide, ink-stained, reinterpreted, and ready to explode. The bridge between East and West was built in intellectual hotspots: Alexandria, Toledo, Cordoba, cities where Muslim, Christian, and Jewish scholars worked side by side. In rare moments of peace, these minds translated dusty scrolls, deciphering Jabir's cryptic symbols, the musings of Aristotle, the visions of Zosimos. They reawakened ideas Europe had long buried. By the 12th century, the hunger for knowledge was insatiable. Alchemical texts landed like thunderclaps across Europe. These weren't just recipes for strange powders, they were blueprints for a different world. A fusion of matter and meaning, spirit and science. Monks began hiding odd diagrams behind scripture. Priests whispered of metals and miracles. In torchlit studies, the European mind latched onto one burning concept: transmutation. The idea that just as lead could become gold, the soul could rise from base to divine. One of the most influential works to make the leap was the Turba Philosophorum, the Assembly of the Philosophers, an esoteric dialogue between ancient sages on nature's secrets. Then came the Picatrix, a massive Arabic grimoire drenched in astrology and alchemical riddles. These weren't instruction manuals. They were worldviews wrapped in metaphor and fire. Latin translations of these texts circulated in secret, disguised as religious or philosophical musings, anything to dodge the suspicion of heresy. Because alchemy whispered of things the church wasn't ready to hear, that the order of things could be challenged, that lead could become gold, that man could transcend his station, that divinity might be reached without intermediaries. The church watched, wary. Alchemy's promise was too radical, too enticing. It offered perfection, not through penance but through process. By the late Middle Ages, Europe had accepted the torch. What began in the temples of Egypt, blazed in Persian fire altars, and echoed through Arabic scrolls now flickered in castle basements and behind monastery doors. And with that flicker came a new obsession: the Philosopher's Stone. No longer just a curiosity, it became legend, a symbol, a quest, a holy grail of the alchemical world. Said to transmute metals into gold and grant eternal life through the elixir, the stone wasn't just matter, it was myth. Some claimed it was a crimson crystal. Others, a symbolic representation of the soul in balance. But all agreed it was the key to everything. In alchemical manuscripts, the stone took many names: lapis philosophorum, the red powder, the seed of light. To those who truly understood, it wasn't about gold, it was about awakening. Alchemists began to see the universe as a living being, growing, evolving, striving toward perfection. Even metals, they believed, were alive. Lead was simply immature gold. It just hadn't grown up yet. And the stone? That was nature's fast track, a way to finish what the earth had started. Legends like Albertus Magnus, Roger Bacon, and Paracelsus devoted their lives to this pursuit. They built elaborate furnaces, read the stars, hoarded minerals, and filled journals with cryptic symbols: lions, eating suns, kings dissolving into rivers of fire, each a coded step in the journey of change. The process to create the stone was called the magnum opus, the great work. It was a symbolic transformation of the soul. It began with nigredo blackening, death, decay, the shattering of ego. Then came albedo whitening, cleansing, purity, followed by citrinitas yellowing, insight, the return of light, and finally, rubedo reddening, rebirth, the moment the stone emerges. But why all the symbols? Why not just write it down? Because alchemists believed that real change couldn't be handed to the unready. The stone wasn't for the curious, it was for the committed, those willing to suffer, to break, to be reborn. To seek the stone was to seek truth, not gold, not fame, perfection. As alchemy rooted deeper in Europe, it also began to hide. Once open, now it went underground. The reasons were many: fear of religious persecution, political danger, or simply the need to protect its truths. Whatever the case, alchemy entered its shadow phase. The church remained divided. Some saw Christ's resurrection in the transmutation of metals. Others branded alchemy heretical, the prideful act of man trying to rewrite nature's law. To survive, alchemists cloaked their knowledge in symbols, riddles, and secret brotherhoods. Thus emerged the great societies of mystery. The Rosicrucians appeared in the 17th century, a hidden fraternity claiming ancient alchemical lineage. Their manifestos spoke of enlightenment, universal harmony, and secret wisdom from Egypt and Arabia. No one could prove they existed, but their ideas spread like wildfire. Then there were the Freemasons, whose roots lay in stonecraft but whose symbols glowed with alchemical meaning. Light, purification, and the building of a perfect self, all echoes of the great work. Alchemy also hid in texts like the Mutus Liber, a book with no words, only strange illustrations telling the story of transformation through pictures alone. Others wrote in green language a code of puns, poetry, and double meanings. Alchemists became dual beings, publicly scholars, priests, or doctors, privately revolutionaries of the soul. And yet, this secrecy didn't kill alchemy. It saved it. Buried under ash, the flame lived on, passed from master to apprentice. Not as a fading science, but a living, breathing philosophy. Until finally, alchemy met its biggest rival yet, modern chemistry. By the 17th and 18th centuries, a quiet revolution was underway. The Enlightenment dawned, bringing with it a sharp sword of logic, reason, and cold calculation. Alchemy, with its metaphors and moon charts, had no seat at the scientific table. Gone were the symbols. In came the experiments, measurable results, repeatable tests. A new language, clear, clinical, and absolute, took over. Alchemy didn't die with a bang. It was dissected, reorganized, and reborn as something new. Chemistry. The transition was led by men like Robert Boyle, who in 1661 published The Skeptical Chymist. He argued that the universe was built of atoms, not elemental humors. Reactions could be explained by physical law, not mystical force. He didn't mock the alchemists, he honored them, but he stripped the metaphor bare. Then came Antoine Lavoisier, who unveiled the role of oxygen in combustion and buried the four-element theory for good. Laboratories replaced lodges. Periodic tables replaced arcane glyphs. The philosopher's stone became an embarrassment. Chemistry had no patience for dragons and red suns. But here's the twist. Without alchemy, there would be no chemistry. The flasks, the furnaces, the discipline, all born from the alchemist's quest. Alchemy lit the first torch. Chemistry just carried it forward. Science surged into the industrial age. Governments funded labs, not lodges. Riddles gave way to research. The sacred was traded for the scalable. But not everything was lost. Because even in the quiet corners, behind dusty bookshelves and beneath skeptical minds, alchemy endured, not as a science, but as a symbol, a metaphor for growth, unity, wholeness. And as the world chased empirical truths, some still turned to alchemy, not for gold, but for meaning. Because some fires never die. They just burn quieter. Alchemy may have left the lecture halls, but it was never buried. Like all great truths, it changed shape. What began in Egyptian tombs, sharpened in Persian fire temples, and coded into Europe's arcane texts, didn't vanish. It scattered into chemistry, medicine, psychology, and modern spirituality. It shed its skin, but its heart never stopped beating. In the 20th century, a new kind of alchemist emerged. No furnace, just a notebook, a dream, and a burning question. What if the gold was always inside us? Carl Jung, the Swiss psychologist, rekindled alchemy's flame in the human psyche. He saw ancient alchemical texts as roadmaps of the mind, the blackening depression, the whitening insight, the reddening rebirth, the stone, wholeness, completion, the soul, transformed. To Jung, the alchemists weren't chasing gold. They were chasing themselves. And maybe so are we. Refine, distill, purify. These weren't just steps in a process, they were milestones on the journey of becoming. And though alchemy may have slipped from the spotlight, its spirit never truly vanished. Even modern science echoes its rhythm. Today, chemists split atoms in reactors. Physicists chase whispers of dark matter and unified fields with the same awe that ancient alchemists once reserved for ether and quintessence. The quest continues, only the vocabulary has evolved. But perhaps the deepest gift of alchemy wasn't its methods, it was its mindset. A relentless belief in unity, that the physical and spiritual were not two paths, but one. It taught that real transformation didn't start in the furnace or the flask. It began within. Every experiment, every transmutation asked the same sacred question. Who are you becoming through this? And in a world obsessed with speed, data, and digitized results, alchemy still whispers its ancient truth. To change anything meaningfully, you must be willing to change yourself. The crucibles are gone. The flame now burns quietly inside hearts, waiting for those still listening. Because alchemy was never just a science. It was a mirror. Now, let's travel not through philosophy, but through stone. Let's descend into a place few know exists, though it lies just beneath our feet. At first glance, Cappadocia looks like something lifted from a surreal painting. Its skyline is pierced with jagged towers of rock mushroom-shaped pinnacles, wind-carved cliffs, and rippling stone waves frozen in time. Tourists marvel at the alien landscape above, but the true wonder, it hides below. Beneath this volcanic canvas lies an entire world carved into the earth, a vast, forgotten labyrinth of underground cities that stretch for miles beneath central Turkey. These aren't shallow caves or emergency shelters. They're fully built societies with homes, schools, places of worship, storage rooms, even stables, entire civilizations tucked into the rock like memories sealed in stone. Some of these cities plunge more than 18 stories deep. The most famous discovery came by complete accident. In 1963, in the town of Derinkuyu, a man doing simple renovations in his home broke through a basement wall and found something strange. A tunnel, which led to a chamber, which led to a winding stone staircase that spiraled downward. What he had stumbled upon was not a cellar. It was an entrance to one of the largest ancient underground cities ever uncovered, a sprawling, engineered subterranean stronghold hidden in silence for centuries. An entire civilization had vanished beneath the soil, and no one noticed until a wall came down. And Derinkuyu, it wasn't alone. Over time, archaeologists uncovered more than 200 underground settlements scattered across Cappadocia. At least 40 of them were large enough to be considered full cities. These cities were connected by narrow tunnels, sealed with immense rolling stones, and outfitted with hidden escape passages. Every feature was deliberate. Every stone served a purpose. Ventilation shafts rose like secret chimneys, drawing in fresh air. Wells tapped into underground aquifers. Doors were cut from giant stone discs, able to block entry from invaders, yet rolled easily from within. These cities weren't caves, they were sanctuaries built for endurance. But why? Who were they hiding from? The answer remains elusive. And that's what makes this discovery so chilling. To understand why entire populations would disappear into the rock, we have to first understand Cappadocia itself. This landscape is more than just bizarrely beautiful. It's a product of fire. Millions of years ago, volcanoes erupted with violent fury, blanketing the region in layers of ash and lava. Over time, that ash hardened into a soft, porous rock that's easy to carve, yet strong enough to last for millennia. Wind and rain sculpted the surface into fairy chimneys and jagged towers. But the ancient inhabitants of this land didn't just stare at the strange shapes, they realized the rock was a gift. With basic tools, they could carve entire lives into it. No bricks, no timber, just patience and precision. At first, these were small caves, cool in the summer, warm in the winter, ideal for storing food or escaping a storm. But as generations passed, the needs grew. So did the depth. Rooms became levels. Levels became networks. And networks became cities. Once they started digging, they never stopped. They didn't just dig randomly. They engineered. Tunnels connected homes to kitchens, storage rooms to stables, chapels to chambers. They designed complex air system shafts that ran vertically through the earth, some stretching over 50 meters, feeding oxygen through 18 levels without machinery. Staircases were carved with livestock in mind, narrow enough to block intruders, wide enough to keep life moving. And these weren't rushed jobs. Some of the earliest levels may date back to the Hittite Empire around 2000 BCE, meaning parts of these cities are over 4,000 years old. That's older than the pyramids of Giza. The earth in Cappadocia wasn't just land, it was home, armor, sanctuary, and sky all at once. But again, we return to the question, what were they hiding from? Because this wasn't a quick fix. The cities weren't dug out in panic. They were built over generations, layer by layer, in expectation of danger that didn't pass. These weren't shelters. They were strategic disappearances. That in yyou remains the most astonishing of all. With multiple levels stretching 18 stories down, it's a masterpiece of ancient engineering. It contained communal kitchens, chapels, storage vaults, wineries, stables, and even a baptismal chamber. It had wells and air shafts, every necessity of life hidden beneath the soil. Some estimates say it could support 20,000 people plus livestock for extended periods. And here's the eerie part. There's no writing, no carvings, no clear answer to who built it first or why. Some claim early Christians expanded the cities while fleeing Roman or Arab persecution. Others believe the Phrygians or Hittites began digging long before Christianity was even a whisper. If so, who were they escaping? That's where the speculation begins. Most historians agree Cappadocia saw waves of invasion: Persians, Assyrians, Byzantines, Romans. It was a corridor of conquest. But the depth and planning involved suggests the threat wasn't just invaders on horseback. This wasn't a reaction. It was preparation deep, generational preparation. The kind of planning you make if the enemy doesn't just raid, but hunts. Some go further. They propose these cities were a response to environmental catastrophe, solar storms, volcanic winters, events that scorched the land or blotted out the sky. Others drift into the realm of ancient legend, whispering of sky gods and watchers, of cosmic events so terrifying they sent entire civilizations underground. Sound far-fetched? Maybe. But then you stand in one of those tunnels carved in perfect silence, fitted with rolling doors designed to vanish into stone, and you realize something. These people weren't just hiding. They were trying not to be found. The mystery only deepens the more you descend. The architecture wasn't crude, it was meticulous. Living quarters sat closer to the surface for quick escape. Deeper down were kitchens, wineries, and granaries, carefully positioned to prevent fire from sweeping through the levels. Livestock pens were placed to manage waste and heat. Communication tunnels linked settlements. Escape routes were dug into valleys and riverbeds. The air system? Gravity and geometry. No fans, no tools, just ancient brilliance. Even the water supply was protected. Wells were carved from underground aquifers and sealed from above, preventing poisoning during sieges. It's a level of forethought that boggles the modern mind. And the defense systems? Genius. Invaders could only approach single file. Trapdoors waited. Stone discs weighing hundreds of pounds could be rolled into place in seconds, indistinguishable from the walls they hid in. These cities weren't just for emergencies. They were fortresses, designed not just to survive but to vanish from history if needed. Which brings us back to the central question. What kind of threat lasts long enough to justify a society underground? Were they fleeing soldiers, natural catastrophe, or something else? Because the deeper we dig into the stone, into the past, the clearer one truth becomes. They weren't just trying to survive. They were trying to disappear. And maybe, just maybe, they succeeded. Narrow corridors stretched into the unknown, each step echoing through stone like whispers of lives long gone. Dozens of oil lamps once lined these passages, their soft glow flickering off the walls, their smoke rising through cleverly carved vents that doubled as lifelines. The flame lit the way. The design kept the air moving. But even with this ingenuity, life here was anything but easy. Fresh air came in slow drifts. The darkness never lifted. And when the silence came, it was total, absolute. Water had to be pulled from deep wells that tapped into hidden aquifers. Grain was stored in sealed rooms to protect it from mold and rot. Wine presses and vats for olive oil were carved directly into the stone, quiet evidence that even underground, life had rhythm, richness, and ritual. These cities weren't hasty hideouts. They weren't last-minute shelters. They were built to endure. Livestock, goats, sheep, chickens were kept in lower-level pens near the entrances for warmth and easy access. They weren't just food. They were heaters, companions, resources. Despite the limitations, the architects of these underground worlds understood the human spirit. They carved family chambers for privacy, common halls for community. These weren't just survival bunkers, they were echoes of a life preserved with care. It's humbling, really. While chaos reigned above war, famine, fear, whole societies lived below in stillness. People married here, raised children, buried their dead, sang their prayers, shared their meals, not in fear, but in quiet defiance, choosing to protect not just their lives, but their way of life. And what if all of these cities weren't isolated? What if this wasn't a patchwork of desperate tunnels, but something bigger? Beneath the soft hills and jagged valleys of Cappadocia lies a sprawling, interconnected web. Entire cities, not just neighbors, but perhaps collaborators. Derinkuyu, Kemakli, Uzkonak, and others appear to be linked not just spiritually, but literally, through long, narrow tunnels that run for kilometers under the earth. Some of these subterranean passageways are believed to stretch up to 9 kilometers, weaving through the land like arteries beneath skin. Small, tight, and often just shoulder width, they may have been used for secret travel, coordinated escape, or silent delivery of food and information. If confirmed, it would mean that during sieges or threats, entire cities could aid one another like an ancient underground federation, invisible to the surface world. But these tunnels weren't just for movement, they were traps in disguise. They wound sharply, funneled attackers into narrow bottlenecks, and twisted unexpectedly. Blind corners forced enemies to move single-file easy targets for those who knew the terrain. Many were fitted with trapdoors and stone barriers, enormous slabs that could be rolled into place in seconds to block or bury a pursuer. And yet, we still haven't seen the full picture. Even today, new discoveries continue. In 2014, while modern construction crews dug beneath Nevşehir, they stumbled upon what may be the largest underground complex ever uncovered, potentially more massive than Derinkuyu itself. It's believed to house dozens of levels, ceremonial halls, aqueducts, and endless corridors still unmapped. So the question lingers, what were these tunnels really for? Were they simple escape routes, or evidence of a deeper system, a civilization that chose to vanish beneath the earth, not in panic, but with purpose? The more we dig, the clearer it becomes. Cappadocia's underground isn't just a collection of chambers. It's a network planned, coordinated, hidden beneath us for thousands of years. And it's likely not all of it has been found. Because here, in this strange and quiet land, secrets don't just rest. They wait. Even after decades of excavation, Cappadocia's underground remains a puzzle, a whisper from the past that refuses to speak plainly. The walls may not have voices, but the silence they hold is thunderous. We still ask the same questions. Why were they built? When were they started? Who decided to live in darkness, and for how long? Mainstream historians typically point to the Byzantine period, when early Christians fled persecution and dug deeper into the rock for safety. But signs suggest that some of these passages go back much, much further, possibly 4,000 years or more. If that's true, then what kind of danger existed that long ago? One theory points to natural disasters, massive floods, solar storms, climate collapse. The structures with their food reserves, ventilation, and isolation could very well be ancient survival bunkers, designed not for days but for eras. Others take a cosmic route. Some believe ancient civilizations may have taken refuge underground from beings they described as gods, powerful, terrifying entities that came from above. It sounds fantastical until you hear the legends. Locals speak of giants that walked the land, forcing people underground, of fire raining from the sky, of eyes that glowed like flame and left scorched earth in their wake. Myths? Maybe. But myths often carry distorted truths, stretched over time. And then there's the symbolism. In many ancient cultures, descending into the earth represents transformation, a symbolic death, a cleansing, a spiritual rebirth. Could these cities have been more than sanctuaries? Could they have been sacred spaces for ritual and change? Or perhaps they were never abandoned. Maybe they were forgotten on purpose. Because the truth is, no single theory fits. The engineering, the age, the scale, it doesn't cleanly align with any one explanation. And that uncertainty is what unsettles us most. Because sometimes, what lies hidden beneath us isn't just forgotten history. It's a threshold we were never meant to cross. Today, visitors walk through Cappadocia like it's a dream, passing through sandstone valleys, fairy chimneys glowing under the golden sun, hot air balloons floating silently in the sky. But beneath those cheerful footpaths, the earth is hollow. Below the beauty lies a second world, one carved from darkness, one that still holds its breath. Tourists descend into the known parts now. They follow tight staircases, squeeze through ancient doorways, stand in the same chambers where entire families once waited in quiet survival, hoping the world above would settle. But here's the truth, we've only scratched the surface. Many rooms remain sealed, countless tunnels crumble into darkness, and some doorways lead nowhere. Or so we think. These aren't ruins in the traditional sense. They're statements, proof that when the world turns hostile, humanity adapts sometimes, not by running, but by disappearing. They protected their children, preserved their knowledge, hid their faith, and in that decision to vanish, they left us something more enduring than stone carvings. They left us a message, not one written in ink or etched in stone, but a silent one whispered from the shadows. A message that says, we endured, we waited, and we were never as far away as you think. We may not know their names, their voices are lost to time, but of one thing we can be sure, these people were visionaries. They were builders, planners, and minds far ahead of their age. They shaped a sanctuary from stone that would outlive kingdoms, and maybe, just maybe, they never wanted it to be found. Cappadocia teaches us that not all history is written on the surface. Sometimes, the most profound truths are tucked deep underground, intentionally hidden from invaders, from outsiders, even from time itself. What remains isn't just architecture. It's a mystery carved into every curve of those ancient stone doors, a riddle whispered through the air shafts that still breathe, a secret carried in miles of passageways, still shrouded in darkness, untouched and unexplained. Perhaps we'll never fully understand why these cities were carved. Perhaps that's the point. Yet, when you stand inside them rock above, silence all around you, don't feel fear. You feel resilience. When the world above spun into chaos, the people of Cappadocia turned inward and downward. They embraced the dark not as a prison, but as a shield. And for centuries, the earth has kept their secret intact. But now, let's shift our gaze from stone to shadow, from the tunnels beneath the ground to the hidden pathways of the mind. Because in the ancient world, to close your eyes at night wasn't an escape, it was an invitation. Sleep wasn't merely a biological need, it was a bridge. And what waited on the other side could guide, warn, or utterly transform. Dreams, to our ancestors, were never dismissed as nonsense. They weren't flukes of brain chemistry or idle illusions. They were treated with reverence, believed to be messages from gods, spirits, or the soul itself. In many ancient cultures, the line between physical and spiritual was thin and thinner still when sleep set in. To dream was to listen, and sometimes to be chosen. In cultures stretching from the Mesopotamian plains to Egyptian temples in the mountains of Greece, dreams were taken seriously, sometimes fatally so. They could signal a coming war, a traitor in the court, or the solution to a devastating illness. Ignoring them wasn't merely careless, it was a potential affront to the divine. The dreamer, then, was not simply asleep. They were a vessel, an open door through which something greater might speak. And sometimes, that dreamer became a prophet. Entire professions existed just to interpret dreams. Priests, oracles, shamans, seers. These people memorized symbols, studied patterns, and listened closely not just to the dream, but to what lurked beneath it. A snake could mean transformation or death. A rising sun might promise victory or deceit. Each culture had its own language of signs, but one belief was constant: dreams mattered. We still echo that belief today. We talk of following your dreams or waking up to a truth. But in the ancient world, those weren't metaphors. They were instructions. Dreams weren't poetry. They were maps, sacred navigation delivered while the body lay still. Before Freud, before science dissected sleep into stages, before dreams were scanned by machines and tagged as data, they were divine. To dream was to meet the gods. And to return from that journey was to bring back a message. The oldest dream records ever found come from the Sumerians of ancient Mesopotamia, over 5 millennia ago. These people didn't see dreams as random flickers. They believed they were direct transmissions, sometimes symbolic, often cryptic, always serious. Carved into clay tablets, archaeologists have uncovered personal dreams, political omens, even divine visions, all carefully documented. In Sumerian culture, kings employed official dream interpreters, court advisors whose job was to decode the god's will from the whispers of the night. These weren't side rituals, they were governance. One misread vision could change the fate of a city. The most famous example? The Epic of Gilgamesh, one of humanity's oldest surviving works of literature. Both Gilgamesh and his companion Enkidu experience haunting, symbolic dreams as they prepare for their perilous quest to defeat the guardian of the forest. Gilgamesh dreams of collapsing mountains and battles in the stars, visions that are analyzed by priests and his mother alike. To the Sumerians, there were two kinds of dreams, one sent by the gods divine, purposeful, and those that were meaningless echoes of daily life. Telling the difference required trained minds and sacred insight. Temples even had chambers where rulers or high priests would sleep, specifically to receive prophetic dreams. This ritual was the forerunner of what later civilizations would call incubation, inviting the divine into the sleeping mind. But dreams weren't just guidance, they were political tools. A king claiming divine approval from a dream could solidify power, rally armies, and silence critics. The gods told me in a dream wasn't superstition, it was strategy. In the Sumerian worldview, everything was laced with purpose. Dreams were simply the gods' way of speaking when no one else could. The Egyptians, too, held sleep in sacred regard. To them, dreams weren't merely messages, they were doorways, passages into the afterlife, conversations with gods, insights from the dead. In a land obsessed with eternity, dreaming wasn't a rest. It was a rehearsal for death, a visit to the next world, disguised as sleep. Like the Sumerians, they believed dreams could be either truthful or false divine revelations, or distorted illusions born from illness or imbalance. Temples dedicated to gods like Thoth and Serapis practiced incubation. Worshippers would fast, purify themselves, and sleep within the sacred halls, hoping for a vision that could heal, instruct, or enlighten. And those visions were taken seriously. Some were recorded in stone, others were written in ink. But all were interpreted by temple priests, who served as guides between the waking world and the shadowed one beyond. One of the most remarkable Egyptian documents is the Ramesside Dream Book, a scroll dating back to around 1300 BCE. It lists over 100 dream scenarios and their meanings. Eating crocodile meat in a dream, victory over your enemies. Drinking warm beer, prepare for sorrow. These weren't jokes. They were blueprints of fate. For the Egyptians, the soul, the ka, was believed to leave the body during sleep, and what it encountered in the other realm returned as dreams. Encounters with gods, visits from the dead, even confrontations with hostile spirits. Dreams could be divine, but they could also be dangerous. Protective spells were often used to guard against malevolent dream beings. Even in death, tombs describe kings receiving divine instructions through nighttime visions. A god appearing in a dream wasn't just sacred, it was legitimizing. In a world of pyramids and immortal souls, dreams weren't illusions. They were glimpses of eternity. Then came the Greeks, and with them a new layer. In ancient Greece, dreams straddled the realms of science, myth, and philosophy. They weren't only sacred, they were questioned. Greeks saw dreams as messages, yes, but also began to ask deeper questions. Why do we dream? What is the mind doing in the dark? The most sacred place to seek dream revelation in Greece was the Asclepion, a healing temple devoted to the god Asclepius, divine patron of medicine. Pilgrims would travel for miles to sleep in these hallowed sanctuaries. The ritual was intense: fasting, prayer, sacrifices, bathing in sacred pools, all to prepare the soul for a dream encounter with the god himself. In their sleep, it was believed that Asclepius would appear, offer a diagnosis, prescribe a cure, sometimes even perform a surgical miracle within the dream. Upon waking, temple priests called therapeutai would interpret the dream and apply real-world treatments accordingly. And it seemed to work. The walls of these temples were lined with thank you inscriptions, people claiming divine healing through dreams. But the Greeks didn't limit dreams to medicine. In Homer's epics, gods send dreams to influence war. In the Iliad, Zeus sends a false dream to Agamemnon. In the Odyssey, Penelope speaks of two gates, one of horn, through which truthful dreams emerge, and one of ivory, where deception slips through. Dreams were tools, weapons, and sometimes warnings. Even philosophers got involved. Thinkers like Aristotle and Heraclitus pondered the nature of dreams, not just where they came from, but what they revealed about the self. With the Greeks, dreams evolved from divine messages to psychological mirrors. The sacred, it seemed, was starting to shift from the heavens above to the mind within. We may forget the dreamer's name. We may never know the stories they lived, but through their writings, through the echoes of their insight, we remember the legacy. In the 2nd century CE, a man named Artemidoros of Galdus devoted his life to decoding the shadows of sleep. His 5-volume treatise, the Onerocritica, became the blueprint for dream interpretation across centuries. It wasn't just a book, it was a manual of human mystery, a guide to the soul's secret language, organized by profession, gender, status, and symbolism. The Greeks believed sleep was a liminal state, a place where the soul gently slipped its grip on the body, floating in a space between worlds. In that in-between, the mind could glimpse something deeper, either divine messages or truths from within. Either way, to dream was to momentarily touch the infinite. In the ancient world, dreams weren't simply mental echoes, they were time-bending glimpses of fate. Cultures across the ancient world saw dreaming as an act of prophecy. In dreams, they believed, The future spilled into the present, fragments of destiny woven into night silence. And that knowledge, it came with power and with danger. One wrong interpretation could doom a dynasty. One right vision could change the path of an empire. Across Mesopotamia, ominous dreams of blood-red rivers, eclipsed suns, or stars falling from the sky were seen as harbingers of disaster. Temples kept meticulous records of these visions, tracking patterns, decoding omens. During war, famine, or political unrest, leaders consulted these dream logs like oracles written in sleep. In Egypt, dreams shaped dynasties. One of the most famous legends surrounds Pharaoh Thutmose IV, who claimed that the Great Sphinx spoke to him in a dream. It promised him kingship if he freed the statue from the sands. Whether truth or clever politics, that dream became his divine proof, a celestial endorsement of his reign. In Greece, dreams played out in palaces, battlefields, and temples. Before great decisions, leaders often sought omens through sacred sleep, oracles, or both. At the Oracle of Delphi, the priests didn't just offer prophecy, they dreamed it. Even Alexander the Great was said to have dreamt of the Egyptian god Serapis before his conquest of Persia, and took it as a divine green light. But dreams weren't reserved for kings. Common people, too, saw them as a glimpse behind the curtain. A woman might dream of water and interpret it as pregnancy. A farmer might see falling teeth and fear death in the family. Artemidoros chronicled thousands of these meanings. To dream of flying, a sign of sudden fortune. To dream of drowning, a tide of emotional upheaval. These symbols made the invisible feel legible and gave even the powerless access to the divine. But this came with anxiety. What if you misunderstood a dream? What if you ignored a warning? What if the gods had whispered and you didn't listen? Because in the ancient world, sleep wasn't passive. It was a sacred dialogue. Healing, too, often began with dreams, not just herbs or chants, but sleep with intent. Across ancient civilizations, temples of healing weren't just hospitals. They were bridges to another realm, sanctuaries, where medicine met mystery. In Greece, the most renowned of these sanctuaries was the Asclepion, a dream temple devoted to Asclepius, the god of healing. Pilgrims came from across the Mediterranean, not to be treated with potions, but to be healed through visions. They fasted, prayed, bathed in sacred pools, and when the temple grew quiet, they lay down and waited for a dream. The process was called incubation, sleep on purpose, a sacred pause. And in that pause, gods were said to appear, sometimes as light, sometimes as serpents coiling gently, sometimes as hands reaching through the veil. Some claimed to wake cured. Others were given instructions, a path to walk, a sacrifice to make, a herb to gather. The temple priests trained in the art of dream interpretation would listen, translate, and guide. These weren't fringe practices. Thousands came, and the walls of the Asclepians were etched with testimonials. Blindness healed, fevers vanished, pain lifted overnight. And this wasn't isolated to Greece. In Egypt, temples to Imhotep or Serapis offered similar rituals. In Mesopotamia, sanctuaries to Gula, goddess of healing, invited sleep as medicine. All of them believed the same thing, that the soul could speak, and that in dreams, healing could begin. Because healing wasn't just about the body. It was about balance between human and divine, between flesh and spirit. But perhaps the most haunting idea of all? That dreams were not just for healing or guidance, but for communion with the dead. In nearly every ancient culture, dreams were seen as a liminal space, a thin place where the departed could reach back. A visit from a deceased parent, child, or friend wasn't just memory, it was a return, a message. In Egypt, the soul, the ka, was believed to travel during sleep, even into the afterlife. If a dead relative appeared in a dream, it was often interpreted as a sign, a warning, a request, or a blessing. People even wrote letters to their dead, placing them in tombs, asking for protection or guidance, hoping their plea would be answered in sleep. In Mesopotamia, such encounters were powerful and perilous. If the dead appeared in dreams, it could signal an unfulfilled vow, a neglected ritual. The living would respond with offerings, purifications, or ceremonies to make amends. In Greece, dream encounters with the dead were also revered. In Homer's Odyssey, Odysseus descends into the underworld and speaks to lost souls, an act that mirrors what many believed happened in dreams. Heraclitus once wrote, "The waking share a common world, but the sleeping turn inward each to their own, and in that inner world the dead might not." Far beyond the Mediterranean, similar beliefs echoed. Across Asia, Africa, the Americas, dreams were the language of the ancestors. A whisper from a lost voice in the night wasn't poetry. It was presence. To sleep was not to forget. It was to remember, and be remembered in return. Interpreting these dreams wasn't left to chance. It was a sacred science. In Mesopotamia, Egypt, and Greece, dream readers were part priest, part scholar. They memorized dream texts, consulted vast archives, and recognized when a symbol was just a symbol and when it wasn't. Certain themes were nearly universal: fire, water, flight, serpents. But the meaning shifted. A flame might warn of destruction or speak of purification. Flying could signal freedom or the urge to escape. Drowning might represent emotional chaos or rebirth. In Egypt, dream manuals detailed these meanings. To dream of blindness might mean truth is being hidden. To see the moon fall from the sky, a ruler will fall too. But Artemidoros brought something radical. He argued that dreams were contextual, that the same image meant different things to different people. A sailor dreaming of a flood, a sign of safe passage. A farmer dreaming the same, a ruined harvest. He understood something we now call psychological, but in his time, it was visionary. Dream interpretation wasn't guesswork. It was language, a divine code. Symbols weren't random, they were cosmic hieroglyphs. And to know them was to understand the will of the gods, the whispers of fate, the state of your soul. Because in the ancient world, a dream wasn't just a story. It was a message in disguise, a note passed under the door of the universe. Today, we often treat dreams like static, fuzzy fragments we forget after coffee. Or else we frame them as art, metaphor, or stress. But for thousands of years, they were sacred, structured, respected, intertwined with medicine, leadership, love, grief, and power. So, what changed? As logic and science rose, especially after the Enlightenment, dreams lost their divine glow. They were reclassified as brain fog, neural flickers, chemical noise. The gods went quiet, the temples emptied, but the dreams kept coming. Even now, in moments of heartbreak, transformation, or fear, a dream can shake us, stir us, reveal something we'd buried. We might not call it divine anymore, but it feels close. Freud labeled dreams as subconscious wish fulfillment. Jung saw them as archetypes, the symbols of the soul. Both tried to reclaim a little of that ancient magic. And maybe the ancients had it right all along, that dreams aren't distractions. They're mirrors, not just of our desires and fears, but of something more, something eternal. Whether it's a lost voice speaking across years, or a warning wrapped in symbols, or simply a knowing you can't explain, the truth is this: when the world is loud, dreams go unheard. But in the silence, when the noise dies down, they return. A whisper in the dark, a door in the mind. And the invitation remains the same. Close your eyes. Not to escape the world, but to understand it. Because in every ancient scroll, every sacred chamber, every forgotten temple, the dream still waits, and the soul still listens.